Ace Bailey to DC. Can the Wizards hope that he falls to 6? Find out next on Locked On Wizards.
You are Locked On Wizards, your daily Washington Wizards podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello all, and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Wizards, where myself, Abdullah Ayubi, co-host and diehard Wizards fan that provides hometown insights and passion for his beloved Wizards, talk about the potential of drafting Ace Bailey at pick number 6. And I am here with the great Leif, Thulin, a credentialed NBA draft analyst, attendee of the last 2 NBA combines, and host of Locked On NBA Big Board. Thank you for making Locked On Wizards your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And remember, Locked On Wizards is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Wizards, where the best way to help us grow is to comment anything below. And today's question is, which top prospect do you see most likely falling out of the top 5? Leif, let's dive right in. You're the draft guru. Is there a world out there for us Wizards fans potentially getting Ace Bailey and him falling out of the top 5 and landing at pick number 6?
Not without trading up, I don't think. I'd just be a little surprised. Like, there's a lot of smoke right now. So we discussed the rumors the other day. The everydayers heard it about Jeremiah Fears reaching the top 5 and therefore pushing someone down. We saw a rumor of Knueppel. We discussed one of our own of Common Malawach. And so not all those are going to happen. But there is a world where one of those infiltrates the top 5. But one thing that I know about the draft is guys that are projected top 3 the entire year rarely fall out of the top 3. So much less fall 3 spots to 3 to 6, where Ace has been projected all year 2 or 3. It's been 3 for much of the year. I don't think there's a world he's the guy who falls out. I think there's too many people who salivate over just the individual traits he possesses. He can shoot the ball. He's long. Yeah, he didn't measure in at 6'10", but the fact is still the fact that he's still a big wing who's got ball skills and individual creation ability, as well as can stay away from the ball and be a guy that teams feel like will develop into a knockdown catch and shoot guy. And defensively, he's got some traits that make him alluring on that end as well. So if anyone's going to fall, I do not think it'll be Ace Bailey, but I do think there's a world one of Khan, Malawach, or Fears finds a way into the top 5, pushing down maybe a Tre Johnson, which I still think is unlikely, or maybe more likely a VJ Edgecombe.
Yeah, and it's for me, it's a very slim possibility. You brought up a lot of good points there. I think if you're the Sixers at pick 3, that's where I'm really looking to where they could alter the draft, and maybe because I've seen reports about Common Malawach or Knueppel slipping into the top 5. One of the other Duke freshmen outside of Cooper Flag going top 5. I think a big reason why Malawach might be an intriguing prospect for Philadelphia is everyone knows the history of Joel Embiid and how he's just injury prone. And maybe you bring in a shot blocking, elite shot rim protector in Malawach who can also take the load off the front court with Joel Embiid. So is there a possibility where he can go into the top 3, or is there a possibility of getting a guy like Knueppel, who a lot of people, I've seen polarizing takes. I've seen people say, oh, he's at best a role player. And some people are comparing him to the likes of Austin Reeves. And for a big reason why I love Knueppel is he showed up when Cooper Flag went down. Not a lot of people want to talk about it, but he was a big reason why Duke kept on pushing without the number 1 pick in Cooper Flag. And he showed up, shot the ball well, has great size. And Malawach, I mean, again, playing with the likes of Flag and Knueppel, it does give you less pressure on to what you're dealing with defensively and the game plan on you. But at the end of the day, he showed up. Rim, the pick and rolls with him and any other guard in this league would be great. So is there a possibility where you see Malawach at 3 or Knueppel maybe going to Charlotte?
I think it's more likely a top 5 team banks on Malawach's rare traits than a team banks on the sheer productivity of Knueppel. We gave the pitch of why he could be a good pick at 6, and it's the same pitch that people drafting 3, 4, or 5 would see. He was productive in a role, and he excelled in that role, was given a larger role when Cooper Flag went down, excelled in that role, and therefore maybe his upside is untapped. But also, how many players at 5 or 6 do you go, hey, I'm going to bet on traits, and the traits don't pan out, and the player with sheer productivity does? And so that's the pitch for Knueppel. I think it's more likely that Common Malawach ascends into the top 5 than Knueppel, because teams are going to be salivating over those rare traits in terms of his standing reach is enormous. He's a 99th percentile play finisher as a role guy. There's a need in Philly, like you said, in terms of injury protection for Joel Embiid. There's kind of a need in the same vein for Charlotte, because Mark Williams' knee was so bad. And you watch him up close. I go to a lot of basketball games. I saw Mark Williams twice. Mark Williams walks with a limp just walking onto the court. And so if his knees are that messed up, maybe you do go to try to find a carbon copy of him in Colin Malawach, who's got more potential to stretch the floor and be an offensive threat. I think it's more likely he infiltrates that top 5. I do think both those guys probably land outside. I think the most likely to infiltrate the top 5, based on the buzz I'm hearing, is the guy we talked about the last 2 shows, Jeremiah Fears. Because I said it, and throughout the process, I told you my notes that I wrote in November. I said, this guy, if I were to rank out guys with all-star upside, he's a top 5 guy. And that's how many would evaluate. I think his floor is lower than that of Knueppel, and maybe lower than that of Colin Malawach even immediately. But all-star wise, I think he's more likely to be an all-star than both those guys. So I think if teams are trying to draft a franchise-changing talent, the one that's going to infiltrate the top 5 is Jeremiah Fears.
Yeah, and the reports that you said, I mean, someone said as early as 2 and no later than 7, which to me is insane, because for me at least, and we talked about it, Fears is I think he's the biggest boomer bust out of this draft class. A guy who's a really great playmaker, has vision, very fast, athletically like crazy, and can take it to the rim. But also a problem that we brought up was shooting. And for me as a Wizards fan, we've seen time and time and again, you draft prospects who just couldn't develop that jump shot. Johnny Davis, I hate bringing up his name because it brings a lot of PTSD to Wizards fans, but maybe Jeremiah Fears could slip into the top 5. But you brought up the fact that if you're the Wizards, you have to trade up to 4 or 5 to get a guy in Ace Bailey. What do you think, in your honest opinion, especially in a loaded draft class compared to last year, where Will Dawkins traded for Bub Carrington to draft Bub Carrington, you give up Denny Avdia, a guy who a lot of Wizards fans to this day are still scratching their heads over, but I mean, it is what it is at this point. What do you think the Wizards have to give up to go to pick 4 and get a guy in Ace Bailey if he doesn't go at 3?
Well, I think the most likely trade scenario is they give up pick 6 for pick 4 while it's on the clock. This does not be before the draft. This would be while it's on the clock, and you say, here's 6 and 18, and that's not going to be good enough. So they say 6, and here's a future first. So 6 and future first of protections of the Wizards' volition, and see if that's good enough to move up 2 spots, because maybe Charlotte's guy will fall anyway, and some teams like to have more cracks at the bat. I think that's the best chance, because you mentioned Jordan Poole. And the more I've thought about it, I don't know if teams see Jordan Poole as equating to a top 5 pick in terms of the value, because he doesn't return all-star production. Could he be? Absolutely. I'm not trying to say he won't be ever, but at this point in his career has not been an all-star. And typically only all-stars with that type of salary can warrant a trade and make it understandable to make a trade giving up a top 5, top 6 pick. So if the Hornets or the 76ers get Jordan Poole, I just don't see how either team's all that interested in it, because they have LaMelo Ball, or in the case of the 76ers, they have Tyrese Maxey. So I think it has to be future picks as the asset to try to move up and get an Ace Bailey or Tre Johnson.
And if you were the Wizards, if at 3 you see that the Sixers go with Malawach, are you waiting till potentially trading up with the Jazz at 5 to get a guy in Tre Johnson, or in today's episode, Ace Bailey? Or you have to hit up Charlotte and say, it's go time, let's make a trade, let's do some business?
Yeah, that's an interesting situation, because now you've got 4 picks for 3 spots that intrigue the Wizards. Because if Malawach goes 3, Ace Bailey, Tre Johnson, one of those guys is going to go to the Jazz, and I'd imagine the Jazz run to the podium. So that means if you want one of those guys, and you have to put faith in Charlotte to take VJ Edgecombe to get one of those guys. And all reports are indicating, all the mocks I read say Charlotte's going to take VJ Edgecombe. So if that's the case, maybe you stand on your money and you just hope. It's a risky situation, but maybe that's the best course of action, as opposed to giving up a future asset, which would be a future first-round pick and number 6, or a future first-round pick and 18 to get up to number 4, and maybe that guy would be there anyway. So I think if that were to happen, I think you stand pat, unless you're dead set on one of those guys and not one or the other, and then you trade up, because sometimes evaluation, you can nail it and say, wow, Ace Bailey is our guy because he fits our system this way. This is the future we have envisioned, and you don't have quite that same vision for a guy like Tre Johnson. I'm just saying either or. But that would be a situation that I would love to see, and I think would be very conducive to success for the Wizards.
Yeah, it's every day counting by. It's a lot of rumors, a lot of speculations. We'll just have to see. And for Ace Bailey, we're gonna get into it real quick about how he could be the franchise altering guy in Washington if somehow slim possibility he lands at pick 6. But before we do, a quick word from BetterHelp. Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Let's talk about something that doesn't get talked about enough: men's mental health. There is this pressure to always keep it together, to perform, provide, and never show weakness. But the truth is, real strength comes from opening up and taking care of your mental well being. Every year, 6 million men in the United States experience depression, and many go undiagnosed. But talking to someone, a friend, a loved one, or a therapist can make a huge difference. Therapy isn't just for crisis moments, it's great for learning how to set boundaries, build healthy coping tools, and be the best version of yourself. With over 35,000 licensed professionals, BetterHelp makes it easy to find a therapist who understands you. You can connect from anywhere, switch therapists at any time, and fit sessions into your schedule with just a click. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/lockedonnba. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. Welcome back to Locked On Wizards. I'm Abdullah Ayubi here with Leif, Thulin, and we're talking about the speculation of Ace Bailey falling to pick 6. I guess we'll go back into the shakeup at 3. Why do you think the speculation of getting a guy in Malawach over Bailey could potentially happen for Philly? Do you think they're not as high on Bailey as they are Malawach, or do you think the potential of Malawach is through the roof, especially pairing him up with a guy in Joel Embiid, and also you have the likes of Tyrese Maxey and Jared McCain?
Yeah, Malawach seems more likely than Knueppel. I don't see Fears as an option for Philly. So I think the pick is either going to be Ace Bailey or Tre Johnson, most likely, but I can see Malawach at least infiltrating it. Or I could see at 4, Charlotte taking Malawach. That one seems more likely to me. I could even maybe convince myself into seeing Con Knueppel being taken at Charlotte. I could definitely see a world where Jeremiah Fears factors into that equation. So if one of those guys gets into picks 3 or 4, that pushes down a guy like Ace Bailey. So Ace Bailey, the reason why teams are salivating over his traits is he can shoot the basketball. He's able to score from numerous spots, scored 39 points, 37 points, was a 20-point per game scorer basically at Rutgers on a team that was devoid of talent outside of Dylan Harper. And he's got a prototypical high release jump shot, has defensive upside. The reason that it's possible he falls is he takes bad shots. I am of the belief that if you can take those shots and your team is okay with you taking that shot, that means you've put in the work. It's the same thing about Tre Johnson. The people that I felt this way about have a tremendous track record, so I'll list them off. Jason Tatum, I thought settled far too often at Duke, but I had him number 1 on my board because he was super polished, had tremendous footwork. Paolo Banchero, I had number 1 on my board because I thought he settled because he's so big, so strong, he should just go straight to the rim. But instead, he took mid-range jump shots, and I was like, well, at least he makes a decent clip, but I don't like it. Brandon Miller wasn't great at getting to the rim. But man, he could shoot and create shots. Well, he was number 2 pick in the draft with the year with Wemby. They were never going to be number 1. So my contention is Ace Bailey's got a lot of those skills that you just can't teach, and he'll be able to score the basketball at the NBA level, potentially be a guy who can be a top or second option. Very, very likely that he's going to be a very good player in the sense that Michael Porter Jr. is a luxury to have because he's tall, shoots, and even though he's not great defensively, then he's still a really good player that most teams would covet. I think Ace Bailey's better than Michael Porter Jr. in that role because he's going to be better defensively, and I think he's got more individual wiggle to him than Michael Porter Jr. due to all those back injuries. So Ace Bailey, I would say if he falls, it's because teams get scared of shot selection. My gut still tells me he goes number 3, but if he does fall, it could spiral because I've seen the Charlotte. None of the mocks really have him at 4. It's usually VJ Edgecombe, and then I think the slide would then fall at Utah. But you never know if there's VJ going 4 and one of these other guys, Khan, Malawach, or Fears going 3 or some order of that. That means 2 of the higher, more touted prospects fall down to the Wizards, and that would be music to your ears.
Yeah, it would be music to a lot of fans here in DC. The fact that you have the option between Tre Johnson or Ace Bailey. Let me ask you this, Leif. You talk about how Tre Johnson could be the best youngest prospect outside of Cooper Flag. If you were to compare him and Ace Bailey, how would you compare the two, and who do you think essentially could come out to be that better and have the NBA better career?
Well, that's a great question, and I've debated this on a couple shows. So I'll give you an abbreviated answer because otherwise I could talk for the next 30 minutes on it. So my answer to you is, if you ask me right now who I think's better, I think Tre Johnson's slightly better right now than Ace Bailey. And I know that seems like a hot
That's
take, but I
hot,
have it on
Leif.
my
That's
board.
hot.
So Tre Johnson is my number 3 on my board. It goes Ace Bailey, or sorry, it goes Cooper Flagg, Dylan Harper, Tre Johnson, Ace Bailey, and then there's a cutoff between those 4 and the rest. Those guys are all in tiers above the rest of the guys for me. But the reason that I have Tre over Ace is because I envision a world where Tre Johnson's given the ball and let it rock, and you say, you know what, like, you're going to put the ball in his hands, he's going to score the basketball, and in that world, he can have the Shea Gilgeous-Alexander effect, a guy who's effectively a shooting guard playing point guard because his offensive abilities create enough eyeballs on him, and he creates enough pressure. He creates 2-on-1s, and when you get 2 on the ball, all of a sudden he's going to find the open guy frequently enough and uses 25 per game to impact winning. Now, his other side of it is, if he does play the 2 guard, I envision a world where he's similar to that of Bradley Beal, because he's one of the best shooters. I think the best shooter in the first round. I think the only shooter in this entire class that's better is Kobe Brea from Kentucky, who is a marksman. And I think he's that good of a shooter, and therefore I don't see a world where he fails. Now, the reason that I have him above Ace, where I talked about that shooting pedigree, that shot creation, I think Ace Bailey's got further from that ceiling, and he's, you don't necessarily go from a guy who's super lean and reliant on tough shots to a better athlete. I do think Ace's body has further to go because he's got more muscle to put on. He doesn't look as developed, and therefore he's going to get better. And I think if you were to say what's the ceiling for Ace, I think Ace's tippy top ceiling is higher. His 100th percentile outcome is higher than Tre Johnson, but I think Tre Johnson's outcome hits more easily than Ace Bailey's does. And I think Ace Bailey's outcome is likely to be something like a better version of Michael Porter Jr., or a better version of Brandon Miller, as opposed
How about
to
Paul George, Leif? Is that too crazy?
I don't think he's quite the athlete Paul George is. I just don't think he's as quick. But I do think, look, I'll quote myself. Like, I'll expose myself. I made the pitch before this season that I said Cooper Flagg's the best player in the draft, and his 99th percentile outcome is better than everyone's. But if you get me the absolute tippy top 100th percentile outcome, is there a world Ace Bailey's 100th percentile outcomes Tracy McGrady and Cooper Flagg's is Scottie Pippen? And everyone would be like, oh, Scottie Pippen had a better career, but he was the number 2 option. Tracy McGrady was the number 1, and therefore Ace has the best outside in this class. I said that to engage people, but I kind of convinced myself it's not quite that way. But I think that Ace Bailey's got a slightly higher upside than Tre Johnson. I think Tre Johnson's far more polished right now, the better basketball player right now, and more likely to hit like 75th percentile outcome, adds up to being an all-star player than Ace Bailey for me. But Ace Bailey or Tre Johnson falling to 6 seems rich for me, because I just don't think there's a world where VJ Edgecombe or Jeremiah Fears has a higher upside than those guys, and those guys' floors, because they're bigger, is higher to me as well. So a long-winded, but I think Tre Johnson's a hair better. It's like 3A, 3B, but I would take Tre Johnson over Ace Bailey if it were up to me. I would not do that for the 76ers, though, because they already have 2 guards, but that's getting into some deep into the weeds semantics.
No, that was I agree with you, man. I think Tre Johnson is very special. I also think Ace Bailey is very special. So it's going to be really interesting to see how their NBA careers turn out. I want to go back to Ace Bailey because, again, we're focusing on him in today's episode. I know a lot of people don't want to talk about it because they're both really talented, and you can't really make this argument with Dylan Harper because he's pretty much locked in at 2. Do you think there's a little bit of concern about how this past year this Rutgers team was had a below 500 record? Do you think NBA scouts are considering that at all, especially a team here in DC where these last 2 seasons you had 15 wins, 18 wins? Do you think it would be frustrating for a guy like Ace Bailey to figure out his role here in DC? And we're going to talk about this later on in today's episode too, but is there a concern about not being able to make it to the March Madness? It's just a little thing, but I definitely think a lot of scouts keep this in mind, no?
I do think the lack of winning is not a good thing, but I'll give you some other examples of players who have not won and have been picked very highly. Ben Simmons, and for all the knocks that Ben Simmons will get, he was an all-star very quickly in his career and was an excellent player. Jaylen Brown had 1 year where he was very good, but he wasn't the best player. So sometimes that's different. And those were guys that were in a similar draft. Markelle Fultz went number 1 overall in 2017, and his team was terrible. So there's tons of guys like this. I think the fact that their team was built on the premise of, look, we're going to pay all our NIL money to 2 players and see what happens, cost them because they had no money left to recruit other players and say, you know what, you're just gonna wait away from the ball and maybe shoot an open three occasion. That's not an alluring pitch, and they didn't have money to get guys with the monetary pitch either. So I think Steve Peichel, who's like a grit and grind type of coach at Rutgers, was forced to do something he was uncomfortable with. And also, Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper both missed separate amounts of time, and they didn't play together the whole time. So I think there's contextualized things that would make teams palate it more easily. But I agree with you. You want to have winning traits, and I think both those players have winning traits despite being on a losing team.
I definitely agree with you, man. I think they're going to have really good NBA careers, and we'll just have to see if the possibility of Ace Bailey being there at pick 6. It would be great. It would be a miracle. It would compensate for the fact the Wizards didn't have any luck in the draft lottery. And we'll talk about the impacts of Ace Bailey potentially being here in DC, how we would fit with Bilal Coulibaly, how we would fit with Alex Sarr and the likes of Keyshawn George, and with Coach Keefe, and how his development could become his rookie year. But before we do, a quick word from Open Phone. Today's episode is sponsored by Open Phone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need, maybe for a plumber or a service provider. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on. That's why you need Open Phone. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. Open Phone lets me manage business calls and texts from a single app. The shared inbox feature is a game changer. Your team can jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat, and their AI agent handles after-hour calls, answers common questions, and captures leads so you never miss a customer. Open Phone is offering my listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will part them over at no extra charge. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. Back with Locked On Wizards, I'm Abdullah, Ayubi, Leif, Thulin here, talking about Ace Bailey, the kid from Rutgers, potentially being there at pick 6 for the Wizards. I want to talk about how he could fit with Bilal Coulibaly. What are your year one expectations if somehow the Wizards landed the kid from Rutgers, Leif? Do you think he could be an all-star come year one? What do you think? Points per game, rebounds per game? Do you think he helps his team defensively, rebounding? We talked about size, and I know you're really high on him when it comes to his ceiling with a mix of Michael Porter Jr. So let me know, do you think how do you think he stands come year one in DC?
I don't think you can be an all-star in year one. I'll say that. And that's not to give him a slight whatsoever. I just think it's very difficult for a rookie. I'd be honestly surprised if Cooper Flagg's an all-star in year one. So I think that the NBA has too many good wings for a guy to be an all-star in year one. But I do think his fit with Bilal Coulibaly is picture perfect. This is a guy who's offensively oriented but has raw traits to become a better defender, and he can learn alongside Bilal Coulibaly, take some stress off Coulibaly's offense, help him on that regard, and he can be aided by Bilal Coulibaly's tremendous defensive ability and differentiating versatility. I also think that he can play off the ball or on the ball in this Wizards team, because you're not having a guy that the Wizards need to run things through. Like, it's not certain who is the guy of the franchise, and therefore Ace Bailey being there has every claim to it. And I think that's really good because he can have that claim to it. He can see if he has the goods, and you say, you know what, this is the guy we're going to run through. Or you can slow the development curve and have it be an egalitarian attack. First come, first serve. Whoever's hot that day gets the rock and distribute. And you play through Bub Carrington, you play through Jordan Poole. So I think that is a really good landing spot. Like, Washington is a great landing spot for Ace Bailey should he land there. And I think that is a place that can cultivate his talent very appropriately, both on offense and also learning the right traits to play on what is a super lengthy and intriguing front line.
Yeah, I think adding a guy like Ace Bailey definitely changed the trajectory of your franchise. It's hard to be an all-star year one, but I think definitely when it comes to the win column, when it comes to defensively rebounding, the Wizards have been bottom 5 in defensive ratings, rebounding, and just a lot of the point margins losing per game is just it's immense. And if you're Coach Keefe, you need to fix it as soon as possible. It's one thing losing, Leif, but I always say if you're losing by 30, 40 points a night, it's frustrating, especially as us Wizards fans who we want to see a winning team here in DC. And it'll take some time, but getting a guy like Ace Bailey definitely helps. I wanted to ask you, if you somehow land him at 6 right now, if Ace Bailey was drafted to the Wizards, do you think he's the second best player on the team? Do you think he has the potential to surpass Jordan Poole, Alex Sarr come year? I know this is a tough question, but wanted to get your thoughts.
I would imagine he's not the second best player right away, just because he's got a lot to refine. Like, this is a guy who's 18 years old for most of the season of college basketball. He just turned 19. And like I mentioned, I think he's got some developmental physical growth to do, as well as developmental basketball growth to do. I think that he's someone that by the end of the season, I could see his traits taking off, and it's like, oh, this guy's shooting the ball well in the NBA, eradicating those thoughts of, oh, he didn't shoot well as a catch and shoot guy. I could see him becoming a solid isolation player. And then you say, okay, so who's better? Poole probably will still be better if he's still on the roster. But I also think the best way for Ace Bailey to take off is if it's a total youth movement and Jordan Poole's not on the roster, and you see Ace Bailey be the number one option with the ball in his hands. Like, that's the best way forward. I think the best sign for the Wizards, if they were to land Ace Bailey, is for them to say, you know what, this is our guy right now. We're going to put the ball in his hands, and therefore there's some moves that make it clear that the hierarchy is in place. I do think he has the potential to be your best offensive player. He might be slightly inefficient in year one. I think Sarr is the guy you'd rather be your best actual player, most impactful player next year if the Wizards are going to improve. But like you said, when we did an episode about what do we think they're going to be next year, the Wizards have a protected pick that you need to, at least it would be negligent to not consider trying to get into that 2026 draft to find a really good player. I think the Wizards, if they were to land a guy like Ace Bailey, clear the railroads ahead. You get rid of a guy like Jordan Poole and have the offense run through all these youngsters, and you'd have the future run through the youngsters, and you hope that you find your best player in the 2026 draft. I think that's the best case scenario if you land Ace Bailey, because if you land Ace Bailey, I think it fast tracks the next season, and you can even make trades because you find a guy who has that all-star talent. Whereas I don't think Sarr has option one offensive talent. Ace Bailey does. I just don't know if it translates immediately enough to translate into winning basketball, which therefore makes me hesitant to say he's going to be your best player.
I definitely see where you're coming from. I think the mesh of Bub Carrington, Alex Sarr, Keyshawn George, Bilal Coulibaly, a lot of young talent here in DC, and who knows what the Wizards do with Jordan Poole. I truly think if you do trade him, we can maybe get a big in Derek Queen. I'm not gonna lie, I've seen mock drafts of Queen going from as early as 7 or 8, but then people saying that he'll drop all the way to 18 for the Wizards. To me, that's a little absurd. Also, Thomas Sorber from Georgetown, Clifford, a guy from Colorado State. There's a lot of talent in this draft. And if you start off with Ace Bailey and you get maybe one of those other guys I just mentioned, it's a great draft for Will Dawkins. And again, Will Dawkins, a lot of people don't want to give him credit for how he dealt with the Kyle Kuzma situation, letting go of Tyus Jones, Kristaps Porzingis, not getting anything out of it, and eventually going to the Celtics and Suns. But at the end of the day, you get a guy, AJ Johnson, for Kyle Kuzma, a man in Kyle Kuzma who just didn't want to be here in Washington and clearly was out 1 foot out the window. And you land him. You also signed Colby Jones in the trade deadline, and Keyshawn George, Bub Carrington, Alex Sarr in a weak draft class. It just goes to show that we talked about Ace Bailey throughout this whole episode, but even if the Wizards don't get Ace Bailey, I think everything's going to be just fine for us Wizards fans. And it would be nice to get a guy like Ace Bailey, but it's just for how much talent he has. It'll be highly unlikely for him to be there at pick 6. And I think the Sixers are going to eventually pick him at 3, but it was fun talking about it, Leif. I mean, it would be a great, at one point, us Wizards fans were thinking Cooper Flagg and the fact that maybe Ace Bailey, but it is unlikely. And maybe you land a guy in Jeremiah Fears. Tre Johnson, I think, is the most likely delusional scenario. If somehow Utah picks Jeremiah Fears over him, I don't think they will, but it would be something sweet, no?
I mean, I think there's a world where Utah or Charlotte does go in a different direction because of Fears' upside. I just imagine Tre Johnson's polish is too alluring to pass up. But like you said, it's a fun situation. I don't think 6 is possible for Ace Bailey because it's so rare that a guy who's been consensus top 3 all year falls like that unless something's terribly wrong. Nothing's wrong with Ace Bailey. It's just people getting bored in the process, creating a lot of these rumors. And I think there's some smoke. But I do think there's a world where he's not going number 3, and therefore there's more of a possibility to pounce and maybe move up to 4. If the Wizards say we're dead set, if he's there at 4, this is the package to go get him. Because Ace Bailey, I think in DC is a tremendous fit. We talked in our very first episode we did together Say the Wizards don't get one and are at 2. Would you take him or Harper? And you were all aboard the Ace Bailey train. And it's because it fits beautiful. And I think it allows for what he does well to take off and also for his deficiencies to improve. So I'm all aboard the Ace Bailey to DC train. If there's a way to make it happen, that would be fantastic. And I love these type of hypothetical things because I do think there's a world where one of Khan, Malawach, Fears infiltrates that top 5. I don't think all of them do. I don't think even 2 of them do. But just one can cause enough chaos where a team like the Wizards can be the beneficiaries of a drafting maybe mistake and maybe take advantage of that and get a guy that can be the star.
We'll just have to wait and see. Quick, I know we don't have that much time, but 30 seconds here. Recent news came out that the Knicks fired or parted ways with Tom Thibodeau. Do you think he deserved to be fired? And do you think he's a coaching candidate potentially for the Wizards coming up in the near future if they let go of Brian Keefe?
I think it's harsh to have fired him because he was a winning coach. He had a winning percentage of about 56, 57% there. And that was some of it without the stars that you came accustomed to, like the Nova trio with Towns and all that. So he was a winning coach. I don't think he's a candidate for the Wizards, though. Whether Keefe struggles or not, I don't see Tibbs as a candidate because this is a really youthful team. Tibbs is a type of guy who takes veteran teams and grinds them and makes them better and extricates all this extra juice out of the team. He says, you know what, we're going to get everyone's buy-in, but sometimes too much. Like I think he wore down his team. I don't see a culture builder in Tibbs, and I think the Wizards want a culture builder, someone who can transform culture and make a team from that's youthful go to the promised land. I think Tibbs is a guy who can take a playoff team to maybe a first-round exit to a second-round exit or a conference finals. I don't see him taking over a youthful team.
Yeah, I agree with you. I didn't think he deserved to be fired, but I guess with the Knicks track record, they expect better with that much talent. We'll just have to wait and see if the Wizards move on from Coach Keefe. I don't think they should. I think he's the right man here in DC. But that's it for today's episode of Locked On Wizards. Appreciate it, Leif, again for tuning in, draft expert. And again, I want you guys to let us know, is there a world out there where Ace Bailey does fall at 6? And if he falls at 6, which prospect sneaks in the top 5? Is it Knueppel? Is it Common Malawach? Is there a world out there where you're deciding between Tre Johnson or Ace Bailey at 5 or 6 between Utah, and behind them is Washington? And thank you guys for making Locked On Wizards your first listen today. For a second listen, check out the Locked On NBA Big Board Show. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Abdullah Ayubi, this Leif Thulin, signing out.